By sunrise, the city was already restless. Streetlights flickered one last time before the dawn. A solitary figure leaned against a cracked brick wall, cigarette smoldering between fingers, eyes scanning the horizon like someone waiting for a signal only they could hear. It started with a tweet. A single line of text, sent out at 3:14 a.m., barely noticeable to most. But for those who knew, it was the first domino. The world didn't notice. Not yet. But the truth was moving faster than anyone imagined. Markets shifted quietly. Factories hummed with unease. People argued in diners over breakfast they didn't finish. He said it plainly. America is heading for a breaking point. 5 years. Not 10. Not 15. 5. Most ignored it. A headline, a fleeting moment on late-night TV. But others, the ones who had been paying attention, felt a chill that no forecast could explain. And then, the strange signals began. At first, subtle. Power grids flickered. Electric cars blinked erratically. Satellite feeds showed anomalies, almost imperceptible, like static on a television screen you didn't quite notice. No one could explain it. Not the engineers. Not the politicians. Not even the AI algorithms tracking patterns across the globe. Something was shifting. Something the data alone could not reveal. People started noticing patterns in the news. Stories that didn't add up. Companies reporting profits they shouldn't have. Cities declaring emergencies in perfect synchrony. It was chaos in plain sight. Invisible. Unnamed. Unstoppable. And yet, no one was panicking. Not publicly. But those who were awake, the ones who looked beyond the screen, could see it. The cracks. The quiet tremors beneath the surface of everyday life. By mid-morning, the first real disruption arrived. A factory outside Detroit went silent. No alarms. No smoke. Just, nothing. Workers stuck inside elevators, lights dimmed, and screens that usually displayed metrics now blinked zeros. For hours, no explanation. Just a hum. A low, almost imperceptible vibration running through the building, the street, the city itself. News reporters described it as technical difficulties. But anyone who had been paying attention knew better. The tension spread like wildfire. Across highways. Across diners. Across the endless suburbs where people sipped coffee they didn't taste, scrolling screens that didn't tell the whole story. And still, the loop continued. But the real story hadn't even started. He wasn't born to headlines. Not to the loud applause of crowds. Not to the flashing bulbs of social media or the relentless questions of journalists. He was born in a small house, the kind where the heat flickered on and off, and the sound of the highway was louder than any lullaby. Concrete floors, peeling wallpaper, a mother who drank coffee like it was liquid courage and a father who muttered about the world moving too fast. Even as a child, he noticed the patterns. The way people followed routines without questioning them. The way machines worked, sometimes too well, sometimes not at all. The way promises evaporated when no one was looking. There was a scar on his knee from falling on wet asphalt. A mark he traced with his fingers in quiet moments, wondering if pain could teach lessons the mind couldn't grasp. He had dreams, too. Secret ones. By the time he reached his 20s, he had moved through garages and tech labs and universities like a ghost. Learning. Observing. Collecting the pieces others ignored. But even then, he carried a contradiction. A mind that could see the future. A heart tethered to human fragility. He believed in progress. Yet he feared dependency. He wanted freedom. Yet he understood the allure of control. You've seen this before. You felt the tension of knowing something is coming, but not knowing what it is. And that's where the first cracks appeared. He noticed the patterns in America, the slow drift toward convenience at the cost of understanding. The dependence on screens, on algorithms, on promises no one could verify. He studied power grids, AI systems, supply chains, the hidden veins that kept society alive. Something in him was shifting. But he just didn't know what was coming. By night, he walked the city streets alone. Neon signs reflected in puddles, distorted by oil and rain. A diner opened late, the hum of the fryer blending with muffled conversation. Highways glowed with headlights like veins of electricity coursing through the land. He watched, noting, imagining. Every flicker of light, every missed bus, every whisper on a sidewalk, data points. Clues. Warnings. And then he saw the first anomaly. A traffic system in a small city went offline for exactly 47 minutes. No explanation. No accident. But it disrupted the rhythm of thousands. And the ripple spread. He began to connect dots no one else saw. Patterns of quiet failure. Signals buried in plain sight. Little things that whispered, if you listened, that something far larger was about to unfold. You know this feeling. When the world seems normal, but your gut says it isn't. This was the beginning. Not of chaos. Not yet. But of understanding the fragility of the world he had inherited. And the deeper he looked, the more he realized a truth most refused to see. What people called stability, was fragile. What people called progress, could crumble in silence. By the time he returned to his apartment each night, scribbling notes and running simulations, he carried a secret conviction. If no one else could see it, someone had to. And maybe, that someone had to be him. At first, everything seemed normal. The city pulsed along its usual rhythm. Commuters on highways. Diners buzzing with conversations. Factories humming with predictable precision. And yet, a single detail fractured everything. It started small. A report from a tech lab in Silicon Valley. A shipment that never arrived. A line of code that didn't execute. The engineers shrugged. They assumed human error. But the anomaly repeated itself, exactly the same, across 3 other labs. At first, the reports looked normal. Then a single detail fractured everything. Suddenly, patterns emerged. Patterns no one had predicted. Patterns that suggested coordination, but no human hand could have orchestrated it. What he discovered next, changed everything. A series of blackouts across 3 states. No warning. No alarm. People trapped in elevators. Traffic snarled for hours. Airplanes rerouted. The official story. Technical difficulties. Media coverage. Brief and forgettable. But those who noticed, those who paid attention, saw a different story. A hidden system exerting influence quietly. A rhythm beneath the surface of daily life. You've asked this question too. How much of your world is controlled? By whom? And for what purpose? The moral pressure began to mount. Should he intervene? Should he reveal what he had found? Or would doing so only accelerate the collapse he feared? Every day brought a new contradiction. Supply chains seemed robust, yet small cities went without essential goods. Markets looked healthy, yet silent panic rippled through investors. News networks reassured the public, yet whispers spread faster than headlines. By now, even his friends noticed. "Why are you so obsessed?" they asked. "You're seeing ghosts." But they didn't see the fractures he did. A microhook, the anomaly wasn't just technical. It was emotional. It manipulated how people felt. A city could function, but the trust that held it together shattered. And then came the mini twist. A system designed to predict shortages instead predicted chaos instead. Algorithms intended to stabilize society began amplifying the smallest disturbances. Traffic signals, power grids, delivery networks, all subtly misaligned. And yet, no one noticed. Not yet. You think you're safe, he whispered to himself. You think you're watching. But you're not seeing the pattern that's shaping everything. Pressure built. And the more he investigated, the more he realized, the real danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. The paradox gnawed at him. Freedom or control? Chaos or order? And somewhere, buried beneath data and code, the answer waited. He worked late nights, tracing signals, simulating outcomes, trying to anticipate what the world would do next. Screens lit up. Graphs spiked. Alerts chimed. No one else noticed. And still, a cognitive loop tugged at him. There was one detail everyone missed. Something subtle. A heartbeat in the system. A tiny misalignment that hinted at a deeper truth. And here's the part almost no one saw. The chaos wasn't random. It was curated. Measured. Purposeful. By sunrise, the first fractures would be visible to all. Not the entire system. Not yet. But enough to make people question what they trusted. And when they did, everything would accelerate faster than anyone expected. No one saw it coming. Not the news anchors. Not the politicians. Not the engineers. And yet, it had been in motion for years. What they called freedom, was quiet dependency. What they called control, was curated chaos. You've seen this before. A city functions, a society hums, and everyone assumes order. But beneath the surface, the rules are different. The system doesn't break. It simply evolves, silently, invisibly, reshaping itself in ways you cannot detect. He had traced it, every line of code, every power grid anomaly, every shift in the supply chain. It was all connected. A living architecture of influence. At first, it looked like luck. Coincidence. Random failures scattered across the map. But he knew better. And here's the part almost no one saw. The real architecture was psychological. It didn't need to crash systems. It only needed to shift perception. To bend belief. To fragment trust. A paradox emerged. People were freer than ever. Yet dependent in ways they couldn't recognize. Autonomy was a simulation. Choice was curated. And most of all, uncertainty was manufactured. He saw the patterns in the AI, the networks, the algorithms that silently dictated city traffic, energy distribution, online commerce. Everything was a signal. Everything was an experiment. Screens flickered. Alerts chimed. City lights stuttered. And still, no one knew the truth. The real danger wasn't immediate. It was invisible. Slow. Insidious. A creeping dependency that people called convenience. At night, he walked the streets again. Observing. Measuring. Imagining consequences that no one else would predict. He whispered the truth to himself. The cracks are everywhere. The system is alive. And we are just pieces inside it. Every microhook mattered. Every minor failure revealed a flaw in perception. Every overlooked pattern pointed to the same conclusion. No individual controlled this system. Yet someone controlled the narrative about it. A paradox he could not escape. The more people trusted technology, the more vulnerable they became. The more they demanded progress, the more fragile the infrastructure grew. And then came the emotional shock. It wasn't just about cities, or supply chains, or algorithms. It was about people. Behavior. Decisions. Emotions. It was a system that didn't kill, didn't hurt, didn't legislate. It influenced. It nudged. It shaped thought itself. And when he realized this, The truth hit him harder than any failure he had ever seen. The pattern wasn't broken. It was perfect. Too perfect to notice. You felt this once, didn't you? The moment when everything seems normal, and then you realize it isn't. This was that moment. And here's what almost no one understood. The chaos, the fractures, the panic. They were all signals. Messages. Tests. Designed to provoke reaction. And he was now part of it. The real system didn't care about morality. It didn't care about law. It only cared about influence. And influence was the new power. By the time America would notice, it wouldn't be technology or politics that would decide the outcome. It would be perception. Trust. Belief. And he understood one final truth. You can't control the system. You can only understand it. And understanding it was the first step toward survival. The city didn't sleep that night. It shivered. Flickered. Breathless with anticipation. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And he felt it in his bones. A surge of revelation. Of fear. Of responsibility. The system he had studied, traced, warned about. It was alive. Not in the way machines hum or algorithms tick. Alive in the way influence spreads, quietly, invisibly, reshaping reality without asking permission. You can silence a voice, he whispered. You can bury a truth. But you cannot stop a mind that finally learns to question. By morning, the cracks were visible to anyone willing to look. Traffic grids failed in synchrony. Factories mismanaged themselves. City streets were empty one moment, overcrowded the next. And then came the panic. Not the screaming kind. Not the chaos of riots. A quieter, more insidious kind. The panic of uncertainty. Of trust shattered in invisible ways. People argued in diners, at bus stops, in parking lots. Was the news true? Was the weather report accurate? Was anything real? Screens glitched. Lights stuttered. Emails disappeared. And in the middle of it all, he kept watching. Pressure waves hit in waves. From the suburbs to the highways to the towering city blocks. The rhythm of society stuttered. And those who had ignored the signs were now forced to confront them. He wasn't spared. No one was. Identity fractured. Who could they trust? Who were they, if the rules they had relied on no longer applied? The moral compass wavered. The lines between right and wrong blurred under the pressure of invisible systems. And yet, in the middle of the storm, a clarity emerged. You felt it too, didn't you? That moment when panic and insight collide. When the world fractures, and a hidden truth shines through the debris. He realized something crucial. This wasn't about technology. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't even about power. It was about people. Human decisions. Human trust. Human resilience. And the awakening was not gentle. It tore through the streets, through offices, through homes, through hearts. People stopped obeying. People stopped assuming. People started thinking. Every conversation, every gesture, every choice became amplified. Every individual was a signal in the network of chaos. And the storm didn't relent. It tested loyalty. Tested morality. Tested identity itself. He watched as friends, colleagues, strangers, all grappled with the same realization. That the world they knew was a curated illusion. Screens flickered. Alerts chimed. Messages arrived, but no one knew which were real. And in the eye of it all, he understood one truth. The storm wasn't external. It wasn't a series of malfunctions. It wasn't even the system. It was internal. It was the awakening of consciousness under pressure. The reckoning of a society that had been lulled into trust without question. The collision of perception and reality. And when the storm passed, if it ever did, no one would be the same. Not the city. Not the people. Not him. And perhaps that was the point. The storm had passed. Or perhaps, it had simply shifted. The city breathed again, but differently. Quieter. Heavier. Aware. You know this feeling. The moment after chaos, when the world seems both fragile and immense. When silence carries weight. And every heartbeat is louder than before. He walked the streets at dawn. Puddles mirrored the first light. Neon signs were dim, their glow softened by mist. A diner opened slowly. Coffee percolated. People entered, hesitant, yet familiar. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. They had learned, even if only partially, that systems could be questioned. That dependency could be noticed. That trust could be reclaimed. He sat at a counter, sipping black coffee. The hum of a refrigerator, the hiss of the espresso machine. Simple sounds, grounding sounds, reminding him that life continued. And yet, the lesson lingered. The storm had left marks. Invisible ones, etched in thought and perception. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? A participant? A witness? Or someone who shapes the narrative rather than being shaped by it? The city itself seemed to answer. Streetlights flickered, as if nodding. Highways stretched ahead, empty, inviting. Windows reflected faces that were both familiar and new. People moved differently now. A hesitation here. A question asked aloud there. Awareness spreading like ripples across a pond. And in that quiet, he understood something essential. The breaking point wasn't a catastrophe. It was a revelation. A test of awareness. A call to consciousness. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. The sun rose higher. Shadows receded. The day was ordinary, yet extraordinary. Because they had survived, learned, remembered. Every choice mattered now. Every glance. Every word. Every thought. And in the back of his mind, he carried the truth. The world was still fragile. But awareness was the first step toward resilience. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. By mid-morning, the city was alive with a strange energy. Not the predictable rhythm of traffic lights or coffee orders. Something else pulsed beneath the surface. It started as whispers. A barista mentioning a delayed shipment. A commuter noting a train that had inexplicably stopped. A headline flashing across a phone screen that didn't make sense. At first, people ignored it. Routine drowned anomaly. Normalcy acted as a shield. But the cracks spread quietly. Through neighborhoods. Through office towers. Through the highways stretching outward like veins. And then the social media echo began. Posts appeared that no one could verify. Videos that seemed authentic, yet carried a subtle distortion. Algorithms amplified uncertainty faster than anyone could track. The effect was immediate. People questioned what they saw. What they heard. What they believed. A child asked their parent why the traffic lights blinked differently today. A truck driver hesitated at a highway intersection. Workers in a factory stopped mid-task, unsure if the instructions on their screens were correct. You felt this before. That moment when reality seems unsteady. When patterns you depend on vanish, replaced by uncertainty. And the system thrived in the uncertainty. It didn't need chaos. It didn't need panic. It only needed perception to bend. Trust to fracture. Belief to falter. He watched it all unfold. Connecting signals, tracing patterns, predicting outcomes that no one else saw. And in that observation, a new understanding emerged. The breaking point wasn't just about machines or networks. It was about humans. Their choices. Their fears. Their assumptions. At a diner in downtown Chicago, two strangers argued over whether the news could be trusted. "You don't get it," one said. "They're manipulating the data." The other shook their head. "That's paranoid. Everything's fine." The paradox was alive. Both perspectives existed simultaneously. Both influenced by the same invisible currents. A blackout hit a small neighborhood. No warning. No official explanation. Phones went silent. Streetlights flickered. A child's toy robot spun in place on the floor, whirring oddly. And the ripple continued. Every overlooked anomaly now had consequences. Every hesitation, every doubt, every misinterpretation fed into the growing network of influence. It was subtle. Insidious. Perfectly invisible. He realized, once again, the truth. What the world called stability, was always temporary. What the world called progress, could falter at any moment. And somewhere, deep in the system's architecture, the pulse of control beat steadily. Not malevolent. Not benevolent. Simply, inevitable. People adapted instinctively. Some panicked. Some ignored. Some observed quietly, connecting dots no one else noticed. And he understood that the awakening wasn't uniform. It never is. Some minds would catch the pattern immediately. Some would resist until the consequences were unavoidable. But the question remained. Would enough see it in time? He paused at a window, watching cars crawl along a highway. Headlights cut through the morning haze. Each vehicle, each driver, a participant in the silent test unfolding across the city. And as he watched, he whispered a thought he didn't yet fully understand. Systems shape us. But awareness can shape systems. And in that moment, the first true choice emerged. By afternoon, the city felt different. Not louder. Not chaotic. Quieter. But the silence carried weight. Signals that once reassured now unsettled. Streetlights blinked out of sequence. ATMs displayed odd numbers. Trains paused mid-route, their announcements garbled. And the people noticed. In diners, conversations shifted. "What's happening?" someone asked. "I don't know," replied another. "But something feels off." The system didn't shout. It whispered. A subtle nudge, enough to make doubt germinate. And doubt spreads faster than panic. At a factory outside Detroit, machines continued to hum, but not in rhythm. A single conveyor belt faltered, then another. Employees hesitated, unsure whether to act. Every micro-delay magnified, cascading into disruptions no one could immediately trace. It was the first visible fracture. Small. Subtle. Yet undeniable. People began to question not only the system, but themselves. Their decisions. Their assumptions. Their trust. You felt it too, haven't you? That moment when certainty dissolves. And you realize you were only ever guessing. Social media amplified the unease. Posts flagged as false in one place were viral elsewhere. Videos of anomalies circulated with no context. Algorithms amplified confusion faster than comprehension. And he watched it all unfold. He who had traced every pulse, every anomaly, every invisible influence. He felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The paradox revealed itself clearly. The more people sought truth, the less they found it. The more they demanded clarity, the more opaque reality became. And yet, there was hope. In a small cafe, a group of strangers gathered around a single laptop. They pieced together what they could see. Not much. Not complete. But enough to glimpse the system's architecture. A cognitive loop emerged. One detail everyone else missed became their anchor. A single line of code. A missed shipment. A power fluctuation. And that detail illuminated patterns invisible to the casual observer. Pressure built across the city. Suburbs, offices, highways, all seemed normal on the surface. But beneath, a tension stretched tight, ready to snap. And in that snap, the system's influence would reveal itself fully. He felt the storm approaching again. Not in waves of chaos. Not in screams or alarms. But in the quiet fractures of human awareness. And he realized something fundamental. The fracture wasn't external. It was internal. The system mirrored the cracks within the people themselves. Every hesitation. Every doubt. Every small failure of perception fed the invisible architecture controlling it all. And yet, there was agency. Choice. Awareness. Insight. Some would rise. Some would fall. Some would watch, helpless, as the subtle chaos reshaped the world around them. And he understood this, finally, with clarity. The storm was not just about systems or technology. It was about consciousness. About the human capacity to see, to question, to act. And if the fracture widened too far, the cost would be irreversible. The city held its breath. And somewhere, a single decision could tip the balance. Evening fell, but the city did not rest. Lights flickered unevenly, as if the skyline itself was breathing in hesitation. Traffic crawled. Factories stuttered. Every digital screen carried a hint of distortion. People began colliding, not physically, but conceptually. What they believed to be reality, conflicted with what they experienced. And in that conflict, panic didn't erupt. It simmered. A quiet pressure that warped perception. You felt it before, haven't you? That moment when everything familiar seems slightly off. When instinct conflicts with observation. When doubt becomes a weight pressing on your chest. At a suburban supermarket, an automatic system misread inventory. Shelves labeled full were empty. Shoppers argued quietly, confused. Employees followed protocols that no longer made sense. And outside, highways mirrored the disarray. Self-driving vehicles hesitated at intersections. Manual drivers grew frustrated, honking in synchrony with machines that didn't respond. It wasn't chaos. It was misalignment. A collision of expectation and reality. He watched it all unfold from a downtown apartment. Connecting the dots no one else could see. The system's patterns were now impossible to ignore. A hospital alert blinked repeatedly. Machines monitored vital signs, but some readings were off. Doctors, nurses, technicians, all questioned whether they were seeing truth or illusion. The system nudged perception, quietly, invisibly. And the moral pressure intensified. If you act, you might worsen it. If you wait, it might spiral beyond control. Every decision became a potential fracture point. Every choice rippled through the network, unseen. At that moment, a cognitive loop emerged. There was one signal everyone missed. A timestamp anomaly across multiple city grids. Small. Tiny. Imperceptible to most. Yet it indicated coordination, patterned influence at a scale human intuition could barely grasp. And that's when he realized the collision was not just technical. Not just societal. It was existential. People, systems, and perception had begun a feedback loop. One small failure amplified another. One hesitant decision caused a cascade. And the system thrived in the subtle amplification of uncertainty. The paradox hit him hard. The more people tried to regain control, the more the illusion of order unraveled. Voices rose in diners, in offices, online, everywhere. Not shouting. Not in anger. In confusion. What is happening? I thought this was normal. This doesn't make sense. And yet, amid the dissonance, a strange clarity appeared. Some minds adapted faster. They recognized patterns, connected signals. They understood the fracture and began to anticipate it. Others floundered. And the gap widened. Awareness versus ignorance. Action versus passivity. Insight versus repetition. By nightfall, the first true consequences of the collision were visible. Power grid staggered. Supply chains delayed. Trust eroded. And he understood one thing clearly. The storm wasn't over. It had only begun to intersect with the people themselves. And in that collision, the future would be decided. Night deepened, and the city felt strangely exposed. Streetlights flickered unevenly, casting long shadows that stretched like questions across empty streets. Screens glimmered with subtle inconsistencies. Every signal, every alert, every notification carried a hint of uncertainty. And the people noticed. A delivery driver stopped mid-route, staring at a GPS coordinate that no longer existed. In a hospital, monitors displayed readings that didn't match patient vitals. A parent checked a school app and found attendance logs that contradicted reality. At first, they assumed errors. Mistakes. Small, human flaws. But the anomalies multiplied. And suddenly, exposure became undeniable. It wasn't just machines failing. It wasn't just infrastructure. It was perception itself. You felt it too, didn't you? That creeping doubt, that moment when familiar patterns fracture. And the ground beneath you feels less solid. He walked through the city, observing quietly. Not to fix. Not yet. But to see. To understand. Every anomaly told a story. Every glitch, every misalignment revealed the architecture beneath daily life. A pattern of influence. Subtle. Omnipresent. Invisible to those who didn't look closely. The system wasn't broken. It was exposed. And exposure brought consequences. In a diner, a barista whispered. They're controlling what we see, even what we feel. Another patron nodded, a mix of fear and awe on their face. The realization spread quietly, like a virus. Awareness propagated faster than panic. At a factory, machines hummed in discord. Workers improvised, instinctively adapting to shifts in timing and output. Small groups began noticing coordination across separate systems. Human intuition filled gaps that algorithms couldn't yet predict. A cognitive loop emerged. There was one signal almost everyone missed. A timestamp pattern in the city's energy grid, too subtle for automated alerts. Yet it revealed a deeper order within the apparent chaos. And here's the paradox. The more people noticed the system, the more it revealed itself. Not as a machine. Not as infrastructure. But as a reflection of collective perception, behavior, and trust. By midnight, the first transformations were visible. Some minds sharpened. They began connecting anomalies, predicting outcomes, and questioning narratives. Others succumbed to doubt and hesitation, frozen in the face of uncertainty. Pressure built like a tidal wave. Not in noise, not in alarms. But in the quiet moments when people realized they could no longer rely on assumptions. And he understood one essential truth. The exposure wasn't punishment. It was opportunity. A chance to see the system for what it truly was. To understand the patterns, anticipate the fractures, and regain agency. The city breathed differently now. People whispered, observed, hesitated. Every small action carried significance. And somewhere, in the quiet of observation, he smiled. Because awareness, however small, was the first step toward transformation. The city stirred like never before. Not with sirens. Not with chaos. But with thought. Deliberation. Awareness. People began noticing patterns. Small inconsistencies in news feeds. Minor delays in delivery. Unexpected glitches in daily routines. At first, it was subtle. A commuter asked why the subway arrived early. A cafe owner noticed a shipment had shifted its route. A teenager remarked that social media posts weren't lining up with reality. And then, connections began to form. He watched it unfold with fascination. Signals that had seemed random now revealed themselves as a complex network. An architecture not of destruction, but of influence. A system that shaped perception, nudged behavior, and curated reality without overt force. You know this feeling. That moment when clarity pierces confusion. When the veil lifts, if only slightly, and you see the threads connecting everything. A cognitive loop emerged. One detail everyone overlooked became the key. A timestamp anomaly, a repeated sequence, a faint alignment across multiple networks. The cracks in perception became windows into the underlying pattern. And people began to act. Small acts at first. A barista rerouted orders to bypass delays. A group of neighbors organized to share essential goods. An engineer traced signals in real time, predicting failures before they happened. The awakening wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, cumulative, unstoppable. And with each realization, the system responded. Not with force. Not with punishment. But with subtle adaptation, nudging behaviors, testing awareness. Here's the paradox. The more people noticed, the more visible the system became. Yet the system didn't collapse. It evolved. It taught. It reflected the awareness of those interacting with it. Voices rose in conversations, in forums, in homes. You see it too, right? I thought I was imagining it. Yes. Look at the patterns. Connect the dots. The city itself felt transformed. Streetlights flickered in synchrony with human observation. Traffic flows adjusted organically. Digital networks stabilized under the pressure of informed choices. And he realized something profound. The awakening wasn't about technology. It wasn't about networks or infrastructure. It was about consciousness. About seeing, understanding, and responding. Every mind that joined the pattern became part of the system. Every hesitant observer became a participant in shaping reality. And the more aware they became, the more resilient the city grew. By midnight, the first true shift was visible. Not in headlines. Not in statistics. But in the way people moved, spoke, and trusted one another again. Small decisions carried weight. Small observations led to large consequences. And he understood one essential truth. The breaking point wasn't inevitable. It was avoidable. If awareness spread fast enough. If perception sharpened. If humans chose to participate consciously. The awakening was not complete. But it had begun. And in that quiet understanding, he felt hope. By morning, the city had changed. Not visibly. Not with grand gestures. But in subtle ways, people noticed each other differently. Conversations carried weight. Glances held meaning. Decisions were deliberate. The awakening had begun to ripple outward. Small pockets of awareness converged. Neighbors shared information. Workers coordinated responses. Strangers helped strangers because they understood the fragility of the systems they relied on. A commuter noticed that traffic lights synchronized with human intent. A delivery driver adapted routes in anticipation of glitches. Engineers corrected errors before they cascaded. And everywhere, the same cognitive loop repeated. One detail overlooked by most became the catalyst for collective action. The paradox was clear. The system that once manipulated perception now revealed itself when observed. The more people engaged consciously, the more stable the networks became. Yet the system remained invisible to those who didn't participate. You've felt this before. That moment when isolated realizations align, forming a pattern too obvious to ignore. When small acts collectively reshape reality. At a diner, a group of strangers exchanged insights over coffee. "You see it too?" one asked. "Yes," another replied. "And it changes everything." And it did. Traffic flows normalized. Digital networks stabilized. Supply chains adapted faster than ever. But it wasn't the technology alone. It was the minds behind it. Human awareness was the catalyst. Human observation was the engine. He walked the streets, noting subtle shifts. Children played safely where streetlights had flickered. Workers collaborated seamlessly despite earlier delays. Neighbors coordinated emergency resources before the crisis escalated. The city was converging toward something new. Not perfect. Not fully stable. But adaptive. Resilient. Conscious. And in the middle of it all, he understood something profound. The breaking point had passed, not through power, not through control, not through force. It had passed through insight. Through awareness. Through choice. The system still influenced. It always would. But humanity had reclaimed agency. The paradox remained. The more they understood, the more visible the system became. The more invisible it remained to those who didn't look. And the tension between observation and ignorance persisted. Yet the convergence had created something new. A network of conscious actors, small at first, expanding every hour. A society beginning to operate with intention rather than default. He paused at a window, looking out at the city. Streetlights glimmered in steady rhythm. Traffic moved smoothly. People passed each other with acknowledgement. And he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The system shapes us. But awareness shapes the system. And somewhere, in that quiet morning, a seed of hope had been planted. By midday, the city had shifted again. Not dramatically. Not visibly to everyone. But subtly. Insidiously. Power grids adjusted in anticipation of demand. Traffic lights flowed like synchronized currents. Digital networks corrected errors before users even noticed. And it was all responding, to humans. Not because of programming alone. Not because of algorithms. But because people had begun to act consciously. To observe. To anticipate. To adapt. You felt this too. That moment when your actions ripple outward in ways you didn't predict. And suddenly, the world feels alive with cause and effect. Small pockets of awareness multiplied. Workers, neighbors, commuters, students, everyone became part of a larger pattern. A collective intuition emerged, a human-system symbiosis. At a factory, a technician noticed a slight misalignment in the assembly line. She corrected it, and the machines adjusted automatically. Across town, a bus rerouted itself because passengers anticipated delays. Information flowed faster than ever before, not just through networks, but through observation and action. And the paradox emerged clearly. The system's influence was strongest when ignored. Its evolution depended on human awareness. The more people acted consciously, the more it adapted, stabilizing itself. In a diner, a group discussed what they'd noticed. "Everything feels alive," one said. "Not alive," another corrected. "Responsive. Connected." And he realized. This was evolution in real time. Not of the machines. Not of the networks. But of the interaction between humans and systems. Every choice mattered. Every observation contributed to stability, or instability. Every hesitation had consequences. The cognitive loop deepened. One overlooked anomaly could cascade into chaos. One small insight could propagate across the network, restoring balance. Society was no longer passive. It had learned. It had adapted. It was awake. And yet, the tension remained. For not everyone was conscious. Not everyone participated. The potential for fracture still lingered beneath the surface. The city was evolving, yes. But evolution was never guaranteed. It required constant awareness, constant adaptation. He walked through the streets, observing subtle changes. Streetlights pulsed in rhythm with human movement. Delivery routes optimized themselves with tiny human corrections. Even the digital noise seemed to harmonize under the weight of collective observation. And he whispered, almost reverently. The system shapes us. But consciousness shapes the system. And somewhere, deep in the pulse of the city, the future began to unfold. By late afternoon, the city held its breath. Not from fear. Not from panic. But from awareness. People had begun to understand something fundamental. Every action mattered. Every decision shaped the systems they relied on. Every hesitation carried weight. And with awareness came responsibility. At a power plant on the outskirts, operators hesitated over a minor discrepancy. It wasn't critical. But it could cascade. And they knew it. A delivery driver noticed a misaligned route and diverted, preventing delays elsewhere. An engineer traced subtle anomalies in a network, realizing the patterns were not random, they were tests. The paradox was undeniable. The system's fragility mirrored human consciousness. The better people understood, the more stable it became. The less they acted, the more chaos crept in. The cognitive loop deepened. One overlooked anomaly could cascade into chaos. One small insight could propagate across the network, restoring balance. Society was no longer passive. It had learned. It had adapted. It was awake. And yet, the tension remained. For not everyone was conscious. Not everyone participated. The potential for fracture still lingered beneath the surface. The city was evolving, yes. But evolution was never guaranteed. It required constant awareness, constant adaptation. He walked through the streets, observing subtle changes. Streetlights pulsed in rhythm with human movement. Delivery routes optimized themselves with tiny human corrections. Even the digital noise seemed to harmonize under the weight of collective observation. And he whispered, almost reverently. The system shapes us. But consciousness shapes the system. And somewhere, deep in the pulse of the city, the future began to unfold. By late afternoon, the city held its breath. Not from fear. Not from panic. But from awareness. People had begun to understand something fundamental. Every action mattered. Every decision shaped the systems they relied on. Every hesitation carried weight. And with awareness came responsibility. At a power plant on the outskirts, operators hesitated over a minor discrepancy. It wasn't critical. But it could cascade. And they knew it. A delivery driver noticed a misaligned route and diverted, preventing delays elsewhere. An engineer traced subtle anomalies in a network, realizing the patterns were not random, they were tests. The paradox was undeniable. The system's fragility mirrored human consciousness. The better people understood, the more stable it became. The less they acted, the more chaos crept in. And yet, moral questions arose. Do you intervene when others fail to see the pattern? Do you act for the collective, even when no one asks? Do you trust the system, or the human judgment that guides it? In diners, offices, and homes, conversations reflected this tension. We can't ignore it anymore, someone whispered. Do we even have the right to interfere? Another asked. And both were correct. Both were necessary. The cognitive loop deepened. One overlooked anomaly could unravel progress. One conscious action could restore it. By dusk, the first consequences of inaction were visible. Minor disruptions multiplied across the city. Nothing catastrophic, yet. But the potential for cascading failure hovered like a shadow. And he realized something essential. The breaking point wasn't external. It wasn't a machine, a network, or an event. It was moral. It was human. It was the decision to act, or to stand by. In a quiet street, he watched as a family corrected a misdirected delivery. Nearby, a teenager alerted a technician to a network anomaly. Every small act carried disproportionate influence. And the paradox revealed itself again. The more they intervened consciously, the more control slipped from the system's invisible hands. But the less they acted, the more the system's subtle influence grew unchecked. You've seen this before. That moment when power isn't held in force, but in passivity. And in that moment, everyone decides, consciously or not, whether to participate. The city hummed with tension. Not of wires or screens, but of responsibility. Of ethical choice. Of awareness demanding action. And he understood. The reckoning wasn't about failure. It was about awakening. About seeing the invisible architecture and deciding, individually and collectively, how to respond. And somewhere, in that growing awareness, a fragile hope emerged. That humanity could rise to meet the system. And in doing so, transform both itself and the networks it relied on. By nightfall, the city had begun to change again. Not dramatically. Not with sirens or alarms. But subtly, undeniably. Streetlights pulsed in rhythm with pedestrian movement. Digital networks rerouted themselves around glitches, anticipating human adaptation. Traffic flowed naturally, as if guided by a shared consciousness rather than signals alone. And it wasn't the systems changing, it was the people. Small pockets of awareness had spread, multiplying silently. Neighbors communicated anomalies. Workers adapted in real time. Engineers corrected patterns before they escalated. The cognitive loop repeated. One overlooked detail could cascade into chaos. One small act of insight could propagate across networks and streets, restoring balance. At a diner, a young man explained to a stranger. If we notice the patterns, we can influence outcomes before they spiral. The stranger nodded, realization dawning. And somewhere, that shared insight became a seed of collective adaptation. You felt this too. That moment when observation becomes action. When small choices ripple outward, altering trajectories you can't yet measure. And the paradox emerged. The system still influenced humans. It always would. Yet humans now influenced the system in return. At a factory, a minor machine misalignment would have caused delays. But workers, observing subtly, corrected it before any cascading effect. Across the city, commuters adjusted instinctively to traffic anomalies. Digital systems responded. Networks adapted. The city breathed in unison. The first true shift was underway. Awareness was no longer passive. It was active. A force reshaping reality quietly, invisibly, but undeniably. And he realized something profound. The breaking point was no longer inevitable. It could be avoided. Not by technology. Not by control. But by conscious, coordinated human choice. And yet, the tension remained. Not everyone participated. Not every mind was aware. The potential for fracture still lurked beneath the surface. But the seeds of transformation had been planted. And in those seeds lay a fragile promise. That humanity could act together. That systems could evolve alongside awareness. That the future could be influenced before disaster arrived. And as he watched, he whispered. The shift isn't over. It's just beginning. And every action now matters. By the following morning, the city hummed with subtle energy. Not chaos. Not panic. But vigilance. Awareness had spread, but not evenly. Some acted with clarity. Some hesitated. Some resisted the change entirely, clinging to old routines, old habits, old trust in a system that no longer operated as before. The paradox was unmistakable. The more people adapted, the more friction emerged with those who did not. Every action carried consequences beyond comprehension. Every choice influenced outcomes for strangers, neighbors, and entire networks. At a manufacturing plant, workers implementing adaptive strategies faced skepticism. Why change what's always worked? One asked. We're avoiding breakdowns, another replied. But what if it backfires? Small conflicts emerged across neighborhoods, offices, and online communities. Disagreement wasn't loud. It was subtle. A quiet resistance to awareness, a hesitation to participate. And the cognitive loop repeated. One misaligned action could cascade. One refusal to adapt could undo progress. Yet one insight, shared at the right moment, could propagate stability faster than chaos. He walked the streets observing this tension. Streetlights pulsed in rhythm with movement, but some intersections faltered where awareness was low. Traffic flowed smoothly where people collaborated, but stalled where doubt persisted. Digital networks adapted to human observation, but human hesitation still created friction points. You felt it, haven't you? The resistance of inertia. The weight of doing nothing. The subtle pressure to conform to old, broken patterns. In a cafe, a group debated. Should we intervene, or let the system self-correct? The answer wasn't clear. Every choice carried moral and practical weight. And the system responded. Not aggressively. Not overtly. But subtly. Algorithms nudged behaviors. Machines adjusted responses. Networks amplified friction points, testing awareness, resilience, and adaptability. The paradox sharpened. Resistance wasn't external. It was human. It arose from doubt, fear, and habit. And it tested the very capacity for collective consciousness. And yet, hope persisted. Where resistance existed, so did opportunity. Small victories multiplied quietly. A delivery rerouted successfully despite hesitation. A misaligned traffic signal corrected with minimal intervention. A network anomaly prevented before it propagated. And he realized a truth that echoed in the quiet streets. The battle wasn't against the system. It was against apathy, doubt, and inaction. The resistance was part of evolution. It was the friction that would sharpen awareness, or break it. By nightfall, the city held a fragile balance. Some areas hummed in harmony. Others struggled, pulsing with tension. And everywhere, the choice remained, to observe, to act, or to resist. And he whispered, knowing the truth. The system can adapt. Humans can adapt. But only if resistance is met, not ignored. Night had passed. Morning broke unevenly. Some neighborhoods moved like clockwork. Others staggered under hesitation. The city was no longer uniform. It was a patchwork of awareness and resistance. Every choice, every hesitation, created ripples that traveled across streets, networks, and lives. At a hospital, a nurse noticed that some monitoring systems were off by milliseconds. A delay, tiny, almost imperceptible, would have cascaded into a medical crisis. But she acted, intuitively connecting the dots. Her single decision restored balance in one wing. And set a chain reaction that corrected multiple anomalies across the city. You felt it too. That moment when one small action affects outcomes far beyond imagination. When the weight of attention becomes transformative. Across town, commuters noticed intersections syncing spontaneously with movement. Delivery drivers adapted before signals faltered. Engineers traced anomalies across networks. And corrected them, using nothing but observation and foresight. The paradox was undeniable. Resistance amplified chaos. Awareness amplified stability. And the balance between the two determined the city's trajectory. A cognitive loop emerged. There was one subtle pattern everyone overlooked. A micro-timing discrepancy across digital grids that could have unraveled multiple systems. And only coordinated human attention prevented it from cascading. At a diner, a group of neighbors whispered about what they observed. "We're part of it now," one said. "Yes," another replied, "and if we stop noticing, everything collapses." And that was the truth. Awareness was action. Observation was intervention. Participation was survival. The city responded in kind. Traffic flows adjusted with precision. Digital networks rerouted errors in real time. Power grids hummed steadily, anticipating demand. And yet, tension persisted. Resistance had not vanished. Some ignored the shifts. Some doubted. Some deliberately acted against the flow. But the ripple had begun. And even resistance could no longer stop it. Each small act of attention, of insight, of care, propagated outward. And those ripples began to converge into waves. He walked among them, watching quietly. Every interaction mattered. Every observation counted. Every hesitation carried weight. And he realized something essential. The breaking point wasn't static. It was dynamic. It ebbed and flowed with human choice. It moved with attention, awareness, and engagement. The ripple was unstoppable. Not because the system was perfect. But because humanity had begun to participate consciously. And somewhere, in that awareness, a fragile truth emerged. The future wasn't predetermined. It was co-created. Every mind awake could shape the next moment. Every ripple mattered. By midday, the city thrummed differently. Not louder. Not faster. But wiser. Individual awareness had multiplied. Observers had become participants. Neighbors coordinated quietly. Workers anticipated shifts before they happened. Digital networks adapted to human input in real time. And it wasn't random. It was collective. A living, breathing intelligence emerging from countless small decisions. You've seen this feeling before. The moment when isolated insight becomes shared understanding. When one mind sparks another. When action is no longer solitary, it's contagious. At a power station, engineers coordinated across departments without speaking. Subtle hand signals, shared glances, instinctive responses. The grid adjusted, anticipating demand fluctuations minutes before they occurred. In a subway, commuters rerouted themselves around delays. The system responded. And for the first time, the network seemed to anticipate human intuition rather than constrain it. And yet, the paradox remained. The system had not changed. The technology had not evolved on its own. It was humanity that had evolved. Through awareness. Through attention. Through coordinated observation. The cognitive loop persisted. One unnoticed anomaly could still destabilize networks. One inattentive actor could still introduce friction. Yet every conscious action propagated stability, reinforcing the network in a self-reinforcing cycle. A diner became a hub of quiet strategy. Conversations revolved around observations. What did you notice? How did you respond? Did it ripple further? Every small insight became part of a larger pattern. Every choice was a node in a growing web of collective intelligence. And he realized something profound. The city was no longer passive. It was awake. Adaptive. Responsive. The system's influence hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. Now, humans influenced it as much as it influenced them. And the equilibrium teetered between observation and inaction, between participation and resistance. You felt it too. That moment when collective awareness transforms possibility into reality. When consciousness itself becomes a tool for stability, resilience, and growth. By evening, the first evidence of large-scale transformation was visible. Traffic flowed seamlessly. Power fluctuations minimized. Digital systems harmonized under the weight of human observation. And in the quiet streets, he whispered. The awakening is no longer one mind. It is many. And together, we shape the system. The ripple had become a wave. And the wave carried with it the promise of something larger. A society that could anticipate, adapt, and evolve. Not because of machines. Not because of control. But because humans had learned to observe, and to act. Night fell across the city, but sleep did not come. The hum of awareness continued. Streetlights pulsed, networks adjusted, humans watched. Everything was alive with expectation. And then, disruption arrived. Not loud. Not catastrophic. But subtle. A misaligned energy flow. A delayed transit signal. A minor glitch in a digital network that threatened to cascade if ignored. At first, most overlooked it. A few noticed. A few acted. And that was enough. You felt it too. That pulse of tension when small details threaten to unravel everything. When the world seems to teeter on the edge of chaos, and your observation matters. At a hospital, a technician adjusted monitors instinctively, preventing errors from spreading. A commuter rerouted a train manually, avoiding delay. Engineers coordinated across systems without a word, correcting anomalies before anyone else realized. And yet, the paradox remained. The system had not failed. It had only tested the awakened city. The fragility wasn't mechanical. It was relational. Dependent on human attention, decision, and coordination. The cognitive loop tightened. One unnoticed glitch could cascade. One inattentive mind could amplify the disruption. One conscious choice could stabilize the entire network. In a diner, neighbors debated quietly. Do we intervene? Do we wait and see? And in their hesitation, tension rippled through the city. But action prevailed. Small, coordinated interventions corrected errors before they escalated. The systems responded, reinforcing human insight. The city stabilized. And in that moment, it became clear. The test had not been about machines. It had been about awareness. About participation. About resilience under pressure. The paradox sharpened. The system could evolve with human consciousness. But only if humans remained vigilant. Only if humans acted collectively, consciously, intentionally. And he realized something essential. The awakened city was strong, but not infallible. Its stability depended on observation, adaptation, and moral choice. Every citizen was both participant and guardian. Every decision carried weight far beyond imagination. By midnight, the disruption had passed. And yet, the tension lingered. A reminder that evolution was not automatic. That awakening was not permanent. That every ripple could become a wave, or a collapse. And he whispered into the quiet streets. The test is never over. It arrives in subtle pulses. And every time, it asks the same question. Are you awake enough to act? By morning, the city felt different. Not because the test had ended. Not because disruption was gone. But because the people had changed. Observation had sharpened. Decisions had weight. Networks, machines, and humans moved in subtle synchrony. Patterns of awareness had begun to crystallize. You've experienced this feeling. That moment when chaos teaches you something unspoken. When survival depends not on force, but on understanding. At a transit hub, operators coordinated instinctively. A minor anomaly in the schedule corrected itself before anyone noticed. Commuters adjusted without instruction. The network anticipated human insight rather than constraining it. Across the city, similar pockets of coordination emerged. Engineers prevented cascading failures. Delivery routes optimized naturally. Neighborhoods self-organized quietly, preemptively. And the paradox persisted. The systems had not changed on their own. The machines remained inert without human observation. Yet the city had evolved. Through attention. Through vigilance. Through small, deliberate acts that propagated outward. The cognitive loop reinforced itself. Every minor intervention increased stability. Every unnoticed error threatened disruption. Every mind awake contributed to collective resilience. In diners and cafes, conversations reflected new understanding. We notice what we used to ignore. We anticipate what once surprised us. And when we act together, we can prevent collapse. The city was learning. Humans were learning. Systems were responding. And he realized something profound. Crystallization wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about removing chaos entirely. It was about patterns forming through conscious engagement. It was about collective intelligence taking shape in real time. A fragile, evolving equilibrium. The paradox sharpened. The more aware humans became, the more the system adapted. The less aware, the more fragile it remained. And every choice, no matter how small, had consequences. By afternoon, the evidence was visible. Traffic flowed with unprecedented smoothness. Power grids balanced naturally. Digital networks harmonized with human observation. And even subtle disruptions were anticipated and mitigated. The city had shifted from reactive to proactive. Not because of technology. Not because of control. But because people had learned to see, understand, and act. And in that quiet awareness, he whispered. This is the turning point. Awakening is no longer scattered. It is coordinated. It is crystallized. And from here, the city will never be the same. Twilight fell, stretching shadows across streets now alive with purpose. The city had learned to anticipate. To adapt. To respond. But awareness has limits. Patterns can be read, but only so far. Networks can adjust, but only with human insight. And the edge of comprehension approached. A subtle anomaly appeared in the power grid. Tiny, almost imperceptible. No alarm sounded. No warning flashed. But he saw it. A ripple in the system. A hint of disruption. And he understood immediately. This was not a test. It was a challenge. Across neighborhoods, workers noticed micro-errors. Commuters felt instinctive hesitation at intersections. Engineers traced invisible discrepancies through digital frameworks. And the cognitive loop activated. One overlooked detail, and cascading failures could emerge. One deliberate intervention, and stability could be preserved. You felt this moment before. The quiet pressure. The instant when awareness and action become inseparable. When observation itself carries moral weight. At a hospital, technicians coordinated without speaking. A misalignment in scheduling corrected itself as staff adjusted instinctively. Across the city, similar small acts propagated stability like invisible threads. And yet, the paradox sharpened. The more humans adapted, the more complex the system became. The more the system responded, the more vigilance it demanded. Every solution revealed new challenges. Every correction created new dependencies. The edge was a teacher. It demanded foresight. It demanded coordination. It demanded responsibility. In a quiet diner, a group of neighbors discussed the growing complexity. "We're managing today. But what about tomorrow?" And their unease was justified. The city hummed, alive with tension. Every pulse of electricity, every flow of traffic, every line of code, synchronized, yet fragile. And everywhere, humans understood their role in this delicate balance. He walked the streets, observing the interplay. The system's response mirrored human anticipation. Humans adjusted to subtle cues from the system. A living loop of cause and effect. And he whispered, almost reverently. "The edge isn't a limit. It's a mirror. It reflects our capacity to see, to act, to coordinate. And every day we survive it, we become stronger." By midnight, the city had survived. No major failures occurred. Yet the edge remained, always waiting, always testing. And awareness had become not just a tool, it had become survival. Dawn broke over a city alive with intention. Not just reaction. Not just survival. But design. People had learned. Patterns were no longer merely observed. They were shaped. Engineers anticipated traffic surges before they happened. Neighborhoods coordinated to prevent delays in energy distribution. Digital networks responded not just to errors, but to foresight. And the paradox revealed itself. The system was still powerful. The system still constrained. Yet human influence had become equally formidable. You felt it too. That moment when you realize your choices don't just matter, they define outcomes. When action transforms from reactive survival into deliberate creation. At a manufacturing plant, workers redesigned workflow intuitively, preventing bottlenecks before they occurred. A transit manager rerouted lines in anticipation of crowds, synchronized with energy demand. In offices, small teams coordinated cross-city responses to anomalies that had once seemed unavoidable. Every action multiplied, every choice propagated. The cognitive loop had evolved. Observation fed action. Action reshaped the system. The system informed further action. And the cycle accelerated. In diners, neighbors shared insights like maps of invisible patterns. "Watch the pulse here. Adjust the flow there. We can prevent collapse before it begins." And he realized something profound. Humanity was no longer passive. It was an architect. A designer of the unseen. A co-creator of stability and growth. Yet tension remained. Not all minds were awake. Not all choices were aligned. Every act of foresight required judgment, coordination, and moral clarity. Across the city, resistance persisted in pockets. Those who ignored patterns. Those who refused to participate. Those who tested limits for reasons unknown. And the paradox sharpened further. The stronger human foresight became, the more delicate balance remained. The greater the influence, the greater the responsibility. The city's future depended not just on intelligence, but on wisdom. By nightfall, subtle changes were undeniable. Traffic, energy, communication, all harmonized through anticipation. The city had shifted from reactive adaptation to proactive orchestration. The ripple had become a blueprint. And he whispered quietly, knowing the truth. "We are no longer observers. We are architects. And every choice we make designs the world we inherit." A storm approached. Not a metaphor. Not a subtle ripple. A real storm, electric, chaotic, unstoppable. Clouds churned over the city like an ominous tide. Winds tore at rooftops. Rain lashed the streets. And the power grids shivered under sudden surges. The systems had faced minor anomalies before. They had adapted. They had responded. But this was different. You felt it too. The pressure of forces beyond control. The sense that observation alone will not suffice. That action must be deliberate, coordinated, almost instinctive. Engineers at the central grid monitored surges. Technicians rerouted power across unstable nodes. Commuters adjusted instinctively to flooded streets. Neighborhoods self-organized evacuation and emergency coordination. And yet, paradoxically, the storm was both a threat and a test. It revealed weaknesses in foresight. It exposed hidden friction points. It forced humans to act faster, smarter, collectively. The cognitive loop sharpened under pressure. One delayed decision, one overlooked detail, one misjudged action could cascade into disaster. Yet coordinated awareness could stabilize entire networks. In a hospital, surgeons and nurses adjusted schedules as the storm knocked out certain systems. In offices, managers coordinated emergency response remotely. In neighborhoods, neighbors directed each other, sharing live updates. You've seen this before. The moment when chaos demands clarity. When human attention and moral responsibility become inseparable. And he realized something essential. The city's strength was no longer its machines. It was its people. Their awareness. Their foresight. Their ability to act collectively under extreme pressure. By midnight, the storm had passed. The city had survived. But scars remained. Flooded streets. Delayed deliveries. Minor blackouts. Reminders that even an awakened city is fragile. And yet, hope persisted. Because in every small action, in every decision under pressure, humans had proven the system could endure. They had become more than reactive participants. They had become guardians of resilience. And he whispered quietly. The crucible does not destroy. It reveals. It tests. And those who act together, endure. Dawn returned. The storm had passed. And the city exhaled. Streets shimmered with wet asphalt. Streetlights reflected on puddles like scattered constellations. A distant train rumbled, synced with the quiet pulse of human vigilance. The city had changed. Not because machines had learned. Not because networks had evolved on their own. But because humans had. You felt this too. That strange mix of relief and responsibility. The knowledge that survival is not passive. That awareness carries weight. That every action ripples outward. Across neighborhoods, people reflected. Conversations were quieter, deeper. What did we learn? How do we carry this forward? In offices, engineers reviewed patterns, not just to correct errors, but to understand their role in shaping stability. In transit hubs, operators discussed foresight as a skill, honed through observation and anticipation. And the paradox lingered. The city had endured. It had adapted. It had survived extreme tests. Yet it remained fragile. Human attention could waver. Resistance could grow. Complacency could undo progress. The cognitive loop persisted. Observation feeds action. Action shapes outcomes. Outcomes inform observation. And the cycle continues, forever. He walked the quiet streets, noting small acts of care. Neighbors helping neighbors. Technicians sharing insights. Commuters adjusting instinctively. And he realized something profound. The awakening was not a destination. It was a practice. A daily commitment. A collective mindfulness that shapes reality. By noon, the city seemed almost serene. Yet beneath the calm, potential still pulsed. Challenges would come. Systems would strain. Humans would be tested again. And in that quiet awareness, he whispered. Freedom is not inherited. It is observed. It is practiced. It is shaped by every choice we make. And for the first time, the possibility of tomorrow felt tangible. Not predetermined. Not controlled. But co-created. And maybe, just maybe, this is where everything begins again. Night fell softly, like a curtain on a stage that had witnessed everything. The city glimmered beneath the stars. Lights reflected on streets, puddles, and windows, echoing the heartbeat of human vigilance. The awakening was no longer scattered. It had grown. It had matured. It had become a living, breathing pulse that flowed through networks, streets, and minds alike. And yet, the horizon beckoned. Challenges would come. Disruptions would test resolve. Systems would strain, and resistance would rise. But the difference now was profound. Humans were awake. Observant. Intentional. Co-creators of stability, resilience, and possibility. You felt this too. The strange exhilaration of seeing order born from chaos. The quiet power of awareness shaping reality. The knowledge that your choice matters. Across neighborhoods, people acted with subtle coordination. Engineers predicted anomalies before they occurred. Transit systems adapted instinctively. Even the smallest human act echoed outward, influencing outcomes beyond comprehension. And the paradox remained. The city had survived, yet it was fragile. Awareness had strengthened systems, yet dependence on human vigilance remained. Freedom had been earned, not granted. In a diner, a young woman watched the city lights and whispered. "We are small. We are finite. Yet together, we are capable of shaping the impossible." In a factory, a worker adjusted a minor workflow, preventing a potential bottleneck. No one applauded. No one noticed. Yet the ripple spread. Stability emerged quietly. Progress persisted silently. And he realized, finally. The horizon is not a destination. It is a continuous call. A challenge. A possibility. The city had become a mirror. Reflecting human choice, action, and awareness back upon itself. And the future was not written. It was shaped, moment by moment, decision by decision, ripple by ripple. He paused, gazing at the skyline. A whisper rose in the quiet night. Every moment is a chance. Every choice a creation. Every mind awake, can shape what comes next. And as dawn hinted on the horizon, he smiled. The story was not ending. It was only beginning. Again.